As you know, in this series of this month, we are reviewing the content of the 4 scriptures of Nag Hammadi, which actually in their original copy, in their original writing, are identified as Gospels. And when we started this series, I spent quite a bit of time on ruminating about what a Gospel is. It comes from and I'm not going to repeat those all now, but let's say it comes from the Old English word God spell, and it is an inadequate translation of the Greek and Latin evangelion, and in Greek, and evangelium in Latin, which simply means an important and good news. And they were not just religious scriptures, but let's say in the Roman Empire, when Caesar wanted you to know something, then they sent out an evangelion. It's like, good news, people, you're going to pay more taxes. So, some things never change in the world, and that's the kind of good news that nowadays we get from Washington. Nevertheless, by the time that the Nag Hammadi scriptures were written, many of them, although perhaps not all clear back in the 1st century, but certainly in the 2nd and thereabouts, then the appellation of an evangelium, of a gospel, indicated a special status. And that is why I felt that these are the scriptures that we should take a look at. Now, we have so far reviewed 2, namely the Gospel according to Thomas and the Gospel of Truth. And this evening we will devote ourselves to the Gospel of Philip, which belongs, of course, to the same collection. Actually the same collection of scriptural material as the somewhat more widely publicized and popular Gospel of Thomas. And it is, of course, part of what, especially since 1977, when Elaine Pagels published her book that really made a lot of people pick up their ears like a good dog who is finding something interesting. It has become known as the Nag Hammadi Library. Officially, just from a scholarly point of view, the Gospel of Philip is known under the classification of Codex number 2, Tractate number 3 of the Nag Hammadi Library. Here again, just to explain that a tiny little bit, the Nag Hammadi Library consists of codices, which is the earliest form of a book, namely wherein pages are combined and then in various ways made secure, probably by putting a leather strap or something of that sort through them, and then having a leather cover both front and back. And it is a considerable improvement on earlier ways of publishing material, which were scrolls. You may remember that the other famous collection of previously unknown scriptural material was called the Dead Sea Scrolls, because they were really written on scrolls and discovered in that fashion. So these are not scrolls, these are codices. And they have been numbered by the scholars. In fact, the codex which we spoke of last Friday the gospel, where we spoke of the gospel of truth, that is contained in the number 1 codex, which is also known as the Jung Codex, because it was purchased by the Jung Institute to be given to Dr. Jung outside of the body of the material that was found in Egypt. And that is not Codex 1. And in each codex there are several treatises. So this is the Gospel of Philip is the tractate or treatise number 3 of Codex 2. Now, next to the Gospel of Thomas, this is the most extensive and lucid collection of what ostensibly and probably truly are called sayings of Jesus. Although not everything in the Gospel of Philip is a logion, a saying like in Thomas, the majority of them are. And there are explanatory commentaries present, which really relate, I would say, not only to this particular scripture, but really to the content of much of the Naj Hammadi collection. Yet in spite of this, the Gospel of Philip has not received the same attention and publicity as the Gospel of Thomas. Maybe it might be useful for us to contemplate for a few minutes as to why this might be the case. Well, the principal reason is in the difference of popularity, which distinguishing the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Thomas from each other is, of course, actually to be found in their contents. Thomas contains teachings pure and simple, enshrined in sayings attributed to Jesus, where Philip is concerned to a large extent with the implementation of ideas, which you might find at least in part in Thomas already, and related to teachings of a somewhat different order. In fact, it might, with a little oversimplification, it might be said with some degree of truthfulness that Thomas contains information. Philip is, however, a manual of sacred action based on information. So in a certain sense, a good deal of the Gospel of Philip tells you what to do and why. Well, the Gospel of Thomas tells you what to think, what to believe, what to spin in your own consciousness to your own satisfaction. So Thomas lends itself to treatment, to what maybe without any pejorative meaning attached to it, I would call a Protestant mentality, which is primarily theoretical and abstract. It's the sort of thing that appeals to the mind, to the thinking function, as Jung would call it, and of course that is an important matter, because we are, even though perhaps in certain historical periods that might lessen, unfortunately, we are thinking creatures. Some people say that the word for the human, man, in English is derived remotely from the Sanskrit manas, which is the thinking principle in the sort of, let's say, in the Hindu religious psychology. And so we are the thinkers. But of course, fortunately for us, we are not only thinkers, we are also doers, and if we do it right, then we might even be knowers. Because to know and to think is not the same thing. I'm sure if you remember your school days, when maybe there was a little more serious material taught in schools than there is today, that you may have been presented with various material, and then you had to think it over, allow it to enter your consciousness. And so what we have here, let's say, is that undoubtedly every kind of serious pursuit in this world requires at least two things, at least so the ancient Greeks said. The one of it is what the Greeks called theoria, the theory. And the other is action, is the mystery, is the activity within the consciousness of the individuals involved, which causes an increasing, expanding and changing of consciousness. And so undoubtedly, let's say when we have some unusual experiences, which the Gnostics certainly did, and which every modern Gnostic at least aspires to, then once you had such an experience, you ask yourself, what was it? What's this all about? What is happening to me? And there is where the theory comes in. So that there is a theoretical framework within which the Gnostic, shall we say, Gnostic experiences of the individuals find their place. And that makes it much easier to assimilate and to utilize within our own consciousness. When experiences, imagery, whatever we wish to call it, comes to us, active imagination, as C.G. Jung would call it, it needs to be assimilated. It needs to be brought into our consciousness in such a way that it will be useful. And by useful I mean that usually such experiences, at least within the esoteric framework, Gnostic Hermetic framework in this case, are calculated to bring about certain changes within the mind, within the psyche. I don't like that term mind very much because it has been too much associated with the thinking function. But whatever we may wish to call it, the experience needs to be assimilated in a useful way so that it will conducive to the intensification and expansion of consciousness. I might as well throw in a little barb at what happened to us in our culture a number of decades ago. As the result of scientific experiments, suddenly, so it seemed, substances became available in the culture which altered consciousness. We don't need to go into a good many details, we all know what we are talking about. And on a fairly large scale, I mean, you know, that the stuff was just all over the place. And I thought to myself, oh, well, you know, a lot of these are experiences which could potentially be really transforming and inspiring to consciousness, where maybe we are going to have an increase in more profound consciousness in our culture. Where maybe for a very short time, but you know and I know that consciousness has not increased a great deal over the last 50 years. If anything, it has decreased. And you wonder why. People had all these experiences, and here they are, as Faust says in Goethe's wonderful drama right at the beginning, da stehe ich noch ein armer Tor und bin so blind as I was before. I'm sort of altering it a little bit. Here I stand like a fool, and I am as uninformed and as blind as I was before, in spite of all that he has done. So something is missing. Something was missing. Something is missing in our culture in that respect. And what is really one of the elements that is missing is what the Greeks would call theoria, namely a framework within which, in this case, the unusual, the mystical, the Gnostic experience can be assimilated, and by way of assimilation put to the use of the increase of consciousness in the individual's mind, in the individual psyche. And so therefore we find theory and practice in both Hermeticism and Gnosticism. And in this particular case, what we may wish to keep in mind is that the Nag Hammadi scriptures, certainly not all. There are some scriptures there that are really borrowed from kindred tradition, like the treatise of the 8th and the 9th, which is a wonderful thing. We'll have to do an interpretation of that again, which is obviously Hermetic in origin, and very experiential. It really conveys what is happening to the people who are involved in it. And then there are others. But on the whole, the Nag Hammadi scriptures and really the overwhelming majority of the writings that have come to light over a period of time of the Gnostics are Christian in orientation to the extent and in the way that they claim to go back to the founder of the Christian religion, namely Jesus Christ. And this is true, of course, very much of Thomas, because they are all of the logia, the sayings are introduced by saying, Jesus said, Jesus said, Jesus said. And the Gospel of Philip is a little different, because there is a little more commentary, but there is also, we can see, a great deal of emphasis on, let's say, the authentication of the material in terms of being connected with the great teacher, whom all of these people regarded as a messenger from heaven, who has brought great and important spiritual inspiration to them. Now, with my Gnostic orientation and with my Catholic education, I have never considered myself, well, what I don't know, what should I call it, a Jesus fellow, you know, like the fundamentalists who constantly, the name Jesus is constantly coming forth from them like Niagara Falls. But let us say, from the time of my early education, I always recognized that, whatever the criticisms may be, biblical criticism and otherwise, and the foibles and curious statements of the theologians and biblical archaeologists, there was something important going on at that time, and there was apparently a singularly effective and inspiring teacher who was regarded as having been sent from on high to bring an important and a new and a transforming, inspiring message. And so we find that in the Gospel of Philip also. But we also find something else, which, at least to some of us, and I have known a number of friends of mine, we were just thinking about them today, who were tremendously inspired by the Gospel of Philip. And I think one of the reasons for that is that the Gospel of Philip indicates that this particular great teacher and other great teachers have had a twofold mission. And the first branch of the mission is that, yes, they were teachers. But the second one is that they were miracle workers, but not of the kind that you find in the New Testament so much, but rather miracle workers in the consciousness of the people with whom they came in contact with. So they brought what the Greeks would call mysteries. Interestingly enough, in some branches of Christendom, in the Orthodox Church, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Syrian Orthodox, all those, they still speak of mysteries. The mysteries of the faith are the 7 sacraments. They are referred to not as sacraments, but as mysteries. So what is this? Well, if we reach to really the only source where we have information about mysteries in the ancient world, prior to the coming of the Christian era and so forth, then we find that there were establishments wherein mysteries were practiced in several places. Certainly we know probably more about that particular place, namely Greece, where the mystery establishments like the mysteries of Eleusis, the Orphic mysteries, many others flourished, and these were not primarily teaching institutions. That's why I resent the sort of Victorian habit that people still have of talking about mystery schools. I assure you the Greeks did not have little red schoolhouses in the prairie in the Greek islands. There are no prairies on the Greek island. But rather, if anything, these were places of activity wherein certain great insights and transformations could take place in the people who were initiated into the mysteries. And certainly this already existed in Egypt, continued in Greece, from there to Rome, and so forth. So these are the two functions of a Gnostic teacher. teaching, the theoria, and the introducing of the pupils, or whatever we wish to call them, the followers, into mysteries. And so the Gnostics felt that the founder of the Christian religion, Jesus Christ, and incidentally there's quite a bit of interesting material on the two names, Jesus and Christ, in the Gospel of Philip, which is quite interesting, but which I am not going to share with you this evening. It's actually quite involved, but in any event, that he was a teacher and he was a hierophant of mysteries, a person who could introduce people to something deeper, something very insight-producing, and something that would change the psycho-spiritual milieu of the individuals. And obviously the implication being that both of these are important, because as we just mentioned, experience without an appropriate theory is limited in its use. And at the same time, theory without experience is even more limited. And we have a lot of it all over the place. One of our problems with a lot of esoteric material in our culture is that the last sizable, or somebody even wrote a book by that stupid title, but that was called Occult Explosion. And to my great regret, there was even a small chapter in it about moi. So I have occultly exploded in somebody's book. You can tell that to people, you know, that you have met somebody like that. But in any event, the last big flooding of the culture with esoteric, Gnostic, mystical, hermetic, whatever we wish to call it, Kabbalistic, etc. material was in the 19th century. And the 19th century was an exceedingly intellectual and theoretical minded era. People thought that by thinking about something, they actually come to know something. And that is not, that ain't necessarily so, as they would put in some parts of the country. Because the truly profound and ultimately significant issues of life cannot be apprehended and made useful purely by thinking. We can think about the meaning of life till the cows come home, as the popular saying has it, and we still have not gathered any meaning. There has to be something else. And that is why, as certainly C.G. Jung and the depth psychologists of his school have proclaimed, that there are several functions of consciousness, and the thinking function is only one of these. There is a sensate function, which we all exercise with our five senses, recognizing our environment. There is a thinking function. There is a feeling function wherein we evaluate experience not on an intellectual level, but on an emotional level. So with the thinking function, we try to see the theory, the order of things. But with the feeling function, we try to feel about it. How does it feel to us? And then, of course, with the intuitive function, we sort of take the arrow like the figure of the sign of Sagittarius, which is my astrological zodiacal sign, and we shoot it up into transcendence. And then we come up with what C.G. Jung called the transcendental function, what the ancient Greeks called the nous, which is sort of the bridge between the personal consciousness and the greater things. So this is important to remember, because Philip alludes very significantly and repeatedly to the practice of the mysteries. And he says that Jesus was such a practitioner, and he taught other people how to practice. But of course, intermingled with it is also theory. Now, what I propose to do now is I'm going to take a selection of logia, of sayings from the Gospel of Philip, and read them and try to comment upon them. Now, it needs to be kept in mind, however, as probably the most important theoria, the most important theoretical foundation of the kind of thinking and practice which we find in the Gospel of Philip, which has to do with a circumstance that actually has been from time to time, on the various guises, in different ways, been touched by a whole bunch of philosophers and religionists and so forth, and this is the recognition that somehow we, and not only we, but the environment, the world within which we live, are broken. That something seems as if there was a primordial unity of the human being and of the cosmos, but that it no longer exists. And that therefore there is a task in front of a human being. And that task is not just to think about these things or to come up with a hard and fast belief system and then believe in that, but that we need to employ ourselves in a restoration of a unity in the human being and actually in reality. There is something wrong with our reality, and there is something wrong with us. And it is in need of remedy. And beliefs in various things, which we of course find in all the religious systems and other kinds of systems of thought also, does not seem to bring about that reunion or restoration of that unity. And so the Gospel of Philip brings to our attention that Jesus Christ not only talked about this matter, but that he did something. And that therefore, since there has always been that underlying reality of the imitatio Christi, the imitation of Christ, we also can do something about it. It's rather easy to come to the recognition that we live in a messed up world. It's not as easy to come to the recognition that we are equally messed up ourselves, but they are both important recognitions. But then the question is, well, is there anything that can be done about it other than complaining? And I'm afraid that most of us, most of the time, don't get very much farther than complaining. But things have been done about that, and things can be done about it. And therefore, there have always been means which address themselves to the attempt to restore that kind of union, all the way from biblical times and before to our own times and to the times of people like Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. There have been recognitions and practices which were designed and are designed to at least attempt the restoration of a wholeness within ourselves and within reality, which of course is our reality, which are greatly needed. And the essence of the Gospel of Philip in that respect, in terms of what it considers to be the message and the work of Jesus Christ, is in this particular saying, wherein Philip, in the Gospel of Philip is written, the Lord did everything in a mystery. A baptism and a chrism and a Eucharist and a bridal chamber. And in amplification of this statement on other, which I think does explain it a little better, Christ came to repair the separation which was from the beginning, and again unite the two. Now, who are the two? The two, I would say, being primarily symbolized by the binaries or opposites in life and in our own nature. Some time ago, I think maybe a month ago or so, we did a little basic series on alchemy, which is dealing with exactly that situation, that in all kinds of our activities and our thinking and our emoting and intuiting and so forth, we always run into two factors, two opposites. And the alchemists symbolize them as the king and the queen, who is also the sun and the moon, and the salt and sulfur and so forth, and said that these two are interacting, but they need to be united. Now, the alchemist doesn't give a lot of explanation as to how this duality has come to be, but it says, no, there it is, and do something about it. You know, get into your laboratory, fire it up, and see if you can bring the two opposites together, because when they really come together, when they finally unite in an abiding union, then you have the great miracle, the great purpose of alchemy, which is life, which is the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, which is the miracle of the union of the opposites. Now, I probably don't need to tell you, because we talk about this thing all around, and I'm sure that many of you are quite conversant with these things, that this recognition of the presence and the conflict even, and the long process of reconciling and reunification of the dualities was one of the very first great psychological recognitions of C.G. Jung. He wasn't even, I'm quite sure he hadn't even parted company with Sigmund Freud, when he already said that the trouble with the human being is not all this sexual stuff, but it is that we are not united. We are broken inside into several pieces, and that these pieces need to combine, and that the difficulties of a psychological nature of most people, most of the time, are really rooted in that inwardly fragmented condition. And if that, so that we consist of part selves. We think that we will. I'm myself. You know, I look into the mirror. That's me. Oh, really? But let's say. And these part selves, autonomous complexes, as he called it, they are both autonomous and rather complex, because they like to perceive things on their own. And yet their perception is not identical with, sometimes even very vaguely related to the perception of another part self. And that this obviously creates a very disordered internal household, shall we say. Now, later on, as when Jung wrote the Red Book secretly and had various experiences, and then started writing a whole number of volumes on alchemy, then Jung continued with this idea that what we are engaged in, and should be engaged in probably more and more efficiently, is the reunification of ourselves, the reunification of reality. Now, interestingly enough, in its own way, clad in, I don't know, 1st or 2nd century religious terms and so forth, that is exactly what the Gospel of Philip says. There has to be a reunion. And Philip, the author, envisions a great ultimate reunion, which he calls the Bridal Chamber. Now, we have encountered a little bit of that, if you were here, in connection with Thomas, because Thomas had this unusual Gnostic experience in the Acts of Thomas, which is not Nag Hammadi, wherein he was taken to the wedding on his trip to India, and then there he had a mystical experience and rose up into a higher level, and there was a great wedding feast taking place. And it was explained to him that this was the wedding of Lady Wisdom of Sophia and the Logos, which of course is something that various philosophers at that time, especially Philo, the brilliant Jewish philosopher Philo Alexandrinus, had always said that there are two great principles in reality, and they are Sophia, wisdom, and Logos, and that upon their ability to cooperate and so forth, really all the enlightenment, all the wisdom of the human are based. I think Philo is, at least in my humble estimation, somewhat underrated. There was a very, very, very fine philosopher of a platonically inspired Jewish gnosis. In any event, here is the quintessential statement in Philip, which is the 10th saying, the little divisions, the little paragraphs are numbered just like in Thomas. The light and the darkness, life and death, the right and the left are brothers one to another. It is not possible to separate them from one another. Because of this, neither are the good good, nor the evil evil, nor is life a life, nor death a death. Because of this, each one will be resolved into its origin from the beginning. But those who are exalted above the world are indissoluble and eternal. So this is not a very detailed statement, but it certainly states that we have to work our way to a reconciliation and a union of the binaries, which ultimately culminates, and there are many statements to that effect in Philip, in an interior wedding. And this is the wedding of the opposites. Now, once again, if you don't mind me invoking Carl Jung all the time, after all, the anniversary of his death was just a week ago or so, Jung got hold of this with his recognition of the interaction of the anima and animus in the psyche and various other levels of, let's say, these complementary forces, and that this is an extremely important interior task and event wherein the binaries in psychologically, because of certain analogies, they have been often envisioned as male and female, come together and unite and become one being. And when that truly occurs, then we have what the Gnostics would call a real knower, somebody who really knows the truth, somebody who has become united, somebody in whom the miracle of the wedding, the holy wedding, the hieros gamos, as it's called in Greek, has occurred, and also someone who now is a much more, well, it's sort of a vernacular expression comes to my mind because it's almost like a pun. Somebody who is together. See, the problem with us is that we are not together. One time I am this and the other time I am that. In the morning when I wake up I am one person, I am grumpy Stephan who doesn't want to get up, which is a habit of mine since I was a small child, but I still had to do it very often. I just don't like daybreak. Only once in my life, if you don't mind me getting a little more personal, was I almost forcibly taken to see a sunrise. Because I don't like sunrises. Sunsets, yes, but not sunrises. But fortunately it was in a very friendly company up in Northern California, and we stumbled out of bed, and we went to see the sunrise, and then we came back and we went to bed again. That was the good part, that was the good part. But let's say these are, of course, the situations. We are several people. We are somebody in the morning, then we are somebody later. Couple of cups of coffee, we are again a different person. But the issue is that there has to be a real good connection between them. These part selves have to learn how to get along with each other, and how to become friendlier, and how to unite. And when that occurs, of course, then it's a great and wondrous thing, because that division isn't there anymore. This incidentally, again, I don't want to oversimplify, because certainly the Gospel of Philip is filled with marvelous mystical material, which which really has to be experienced, and to just expostulate about it is not all that great. But let's say this is, at least in a sense, in a very basic psychological sense, what Jung called individuation. People think that means how to become an individual. Well, maybe. But what it is in the German, an individuum, is an undivided person. That which is not divided. So to become a person that is no longer divided, unified, is a great, let's say, a great mystery. The truth is one and is many, and that is all in one of the sayings of Philip, and that for our sakes to teach us this alone in love through the many, so that we in our, and I'll come to that further, in our interaction, meaningful interaction with other souls, in acceptance and kindliness, in charity, hope, faith and charity, love, we also facilitate this internal reunion. And so forth. It is interesting to note, for instance, that as soon as the term many is used in, I just read the very last lines of another Logion of Philip, as soon as the word many is used, the word love is also enters the text. And so aletheia, which is Greek for the truth, is the aletheia or truth in the many requires the power of love, so that the many may relate themselves to each other in love and thereby discover the truth. This is definitely present in several sentences scattered throughout Philip. So truth is thus not discovered intellectually alone, but in love and in relatedness. What you find when in reading the various sayings of Philip, that it is very balanced, because it strives for the ultimate, the supernal balance, and therefore it will say yes, truth and love are related. They balance each other. You have to have both. And you can search for the truth by yourself, but you can only search for love in company. And I would say that if anything has been taught us by the terrible year and a half that we have went through, with all the isolations and the lockdowns and lockups and I don't know what else, that was it, that doggone it, we need each other. And we need each other desperately. Maybe there were a few people in history, like Saint Anthony the Hermit, who went out into the Egyptian desert because he wanted to get away from all these troublesome people in the city where he was living. And then what happened when he was out there? They came to him in spectral form, especially all these Egyptian women, probably in their diaphanous outfits and so forth. And poor Saint Anthony was still miserable. So we have to find a way in which we meaningfully interact, and then we actually discover some very important things. Now, let me look at a few others, but Gnostic philosophy is not simple-mindedly monotheistic. I think most of you know that already. And the simple-minded monotheism, which we have a lot in our culture, to the extent that there is still any religion in this secular culture, is that, you know, there really only, in religion there are only two things, me and God, and in that order. Obviously, I'm more important. But that it's a more complex issue. There are intermediate agencies. You can look at them you can look at them as persons, you can look at them as energies, but that are between us and the Supreme. And many of these are, you might say, have sort of the willful, they have their own designs and their own will with us, and they really prevent us from rising to the sublime heights where we might experience the ultimate union, the bridal chamber and so forth, and tie us up in lesser regions by way of various involvements. And the Greek name archon, which means ruler, has been attributed to them. Now here's the 13th saying of Philip. The archons wanted to deceive the human, since they saw that he had a kinship with those that are truly good. And they took the name of those that are good and gave it to those that are not good, in order that by the names they might deceive him and bind them to those that are not good. And after, if they do them a favor, they will be made to remove from those that were not good and set in those that are good, which they know. For they were wanting to take the free human and make him a slave to themselves forever. So what we really have here is that the verbal formulations that are commonly used are deceptive. And that the Gnostic should seek the real meaning that is concealed from our minds. The theme of deception by way of words, which here are known as names, is taken further here. The deceiving powers in this world deliberately give deceptive names, deceptive characteristics to certain things to hold the human spirit in slavery. The Gnostics looked upon much conventional terminology of religion and philosophy as a sort of Orwellian reverse phrase, like in 1984 you may recall, freedom is slavery. And so this, of course, is still true. So many aspects of life that would free us are, for one reason or the other, disapproved of and called bad names and taken out of the common vocabulary and taken out of education and so forth, so that we cannot do what we really need to do because it has been cursed with the wrong label. And that there are, let's say, powers of consciousness in the world and within ourselves that want to do that. And so there is quite a bit about the names and the true name and so forth, really the power, the magical power of words in Philip. And it imposes on us the necessity to look beyond the words and not be influenced and psychically energized in the wrong way by by words that are deceptive. And I think we can certainly testify to that, and especially those of us who have lived through the last 50, 60, 70, I have certainly 80 years of history as to how people have been taken in by nefarious forms of consciousness inhabiting humans, some of them with an ugly little mustache up here, you know, by the name of Hitler, and some of the others, taking people in by words that excite them and that ultimately lead them astray. And so we have to have the capacity to look beyond the words that come to us. Here is the 16th saying. The archons, which are again these deceptive psycho-spiritual powers, the archons thought that it was by their own power and will. Now this is a very important one. By their own power and will that they were doing what they did, including creating the outer reality. But the Holy Spirit in secret was contriving everything through them as it wished. Truth is shown in every place, the truth which was from the beginning. And many see it as it is shown, but only a few who see it reap it. So this is a truly surprising passage as far as the old-fashioned view of Gnosticism, so popular among the experts as it has been for so long, is concerned. Because what this means is, you see, what the superficial view of the Gnostic systems is, still in many books and so forth, that the Gnostics are world haters, that the Gnostics don't like creation, and that's why they have come up with this concept of archons and the demiurge, intermediate beings who make the outer reality in their own image, but who thereby really create a reality for us that's pretty bad. You know the big New Age saying that to create your own reality, where my problem with a lot of people of that conviction or otherwise is that they not only create their own reality, but they want to create my reality. And this is especially true of politicians. It is true of all kinds of people. In fact, one could really go on saying that the Gnostic's primary duty is to discover his and her own reality. And that means a deeper reality that is connected with us, that dwells within us, and that is really our ultimate source of enlightenment, salvation, whatever we wish to call it. It's very, very important. Let's see, that duty is implicit in this particular passage, but it is also true that nothing is so simple. So that, let's say, we can say, the archons created this world, and I'm trying to think of some particularly, they created rattlesnakes. You go out into the hills walking here, and I stepped over them many times. Fortunately, they are slightly timid, so don't be too afraid. The rattlers, if they don't feel menaced by you, they don't think you want to step on them, they're not going to bite you, they'll go away. But there are difficult and dangerous and ugly and disgusting things and people and creatures in this world. And you see, why is so much that is going on really bereft of any rhyme and reason? Well, you say because people without rhyme and reason are involved in doing it. That's probably true. And that is why don't give too much power to governments, because they don't have any rhyme or reason. And governments are by their very nature of limited wisdom, very limited wisdom. Maybe you could even say one wisdom. And then they create realities for you which are terrible. And that's why you have to watch out for. But the thing is that, and in spite of all this unhappy and unfortunate and troublesome situations in the world, there is also, in addition to the overtly present malice and stupidity, there is also something else. And that's what he said. Secretly, there is another power also at work. And that other power, it works slowly, but eventually it comes through and it prevails. So don't get too unhappy and too despairing over the limited intelligence and even more limited goodness of conditions in the world, or in your country, or in your city, or in your room. But keep in mind that there's also something else, something secret, just like within ourselves as such. I mean, most of us are not terribly nice looking, not terribly smart, not terribly appealing, but there is something else. Oh, there's a nice little story about that. It was written by a wise old Dutchman who liked Chinese things. He lived long before the epidemic, let's say. Dr. Adrian Vrede, God bless him. Anyway, he wrote a beautiful little story that is in the Chinese mode. And it's about a young man in old China who came out of the inner part of the country and settled somewhere in one of the coastal cities, which where all the excitement, but also a lot of bad things take place. And he was, he earned his living as a psychic, a seer. So people would come to him and ask him about their problems. When he looked at them, he almost inevitably what he saw, and these were obviously not the nicest kind of people. They were pirates and thieves and people like that from the city. But he always, the first thing that he saw was a frightening demon. And then he heard a voice, and it said, "Look deeper." He looked deeper, and the demon began to change and had a nicer countenance. And then the voice again said, "Look deeper." And now he looked deeper, and he eventually always came up with the image of the Bodhisattva of compassion, Kuan Yin. So this is a bit like that. If we look deeper, eventually we'll come up with the intentionality of the spirit. But if we don't look deep, then we will probably perceive and taken aback by the unpleasant and unwise reality within which we live. So the important thing is not to hypnotize yourself and call the reality within which you live good. It's not good. It's full of evil and it's full of stupidity. And that's a heck of a pair to run up against, and especially the evil. You might be evil you might even be able to defeat. Maybe in my long life, maybe there were a couple of times when I managed to handle that. But stupidity, if it obsesses you, is very difficult to defeat. Gegen die Dummheit kämpfen die Götter vergebens. I think that is Schiller. Against stupidity, the very gods themselves struggle in vain. You know. So we have to, but if we look deep enough into what is going on, if we look deep enough into the darkness, if our vision penetrates far enough, eventually discover, oh yeah, there is still something there, there is a light there. And maybe we can deal with that light. So we must have a position wherein we recognize reality even when it's unpleasant, even when it's injurious, even when it's evil, but also recognize that beyond it there is yet a deeper reality, and if we have the right vision, the right view, we will discover what Gospel of Philip calls the Holy Spirit. Okay, here is a fairly good one. This is the 40th saying. There are animals which are subject to man, like the bull and the ass and others of his kind, of this kind. Others are not subject to man and live by themselves in the wilderness. Man plows the field by means of the domestic animals, and from this he feeds himself and the animals, both those which are domesticated and those which are not. So it is with the perfect human being. Through powers which are subject, he plows, preparing for everything to come into being. For because of this the whole place stands, whether the good or the evil, the right and the left. The Holy Spirit shepherds everyone and rules all the powers, the tame ones and the wild ones, as well as those which are united. For indeed she, refers to the Holy Spirit as she, which is very Gnostic, for indeed she keeps them shut up together, in order not to let any of them escape, even if they wished. So in this parable of the domestic and wild animals, we have another very beautiful proof that the Gnostics were not dualists in the ordinary accepted sense of the term. A real or radical dualism actually regarded the domestic animals as being on the side of the good God, and the wild animals like lions, tigers, snakes as serving the evil power. But Philip's Gospel says, on the other hand, that the dualities all have a common purpose and are united by a common underlying intentionality. If we regard the domestic animals or the powers which are subject as consciousness, then the Gnostic uses his conscious faculties to prepare a field for the great work. By insight and study and understanding the field of life is cultivated. The conscious attitude makes the wholeness possible. What consciousness there is not in the union of the opposites. When the opposites unite, what consciousness there is enters the bridal chamber. Furthermore, says Philip, to us we must remember that all portions matter to the wholeness. And this is also important. So certainly we find that the thoughts, the activities, the disturbances in our mind and in our consciousness are very deleterious and that they make us unhappy. But once again, if we are able to look beyond them, then we find that there is a subtle reconciling and saving principle going on. This is perhaps what in Buddhism and other Eastern religions often is called the Atman, which is the same as Brahman. So the ultimate deity dwells in the soul spiritual principle of individual beings, and it needs to be recognized there, it needs to be paid attention to, and when we do that, then everything changes to the better. This is a fine one, and depending on our time, maybe we'll have to conclude soon. When the pearl is cast down into the mud, the 48th saying of Philip. When a pearl is cast down into the mud, it does not become dishonored the more, nor if it is anointed with balsam oil will it become more precious. But it has its worth in the eyes of its owner at all times. So with the children of God everywhere they may be, for they have the value in the eyes of their Father. So this is a very important Gnostic truth. The essential dignity of the human soul. Unlike in other systems, including perhaps much of non-Gnostic Christianity, or Judaism. In Gnosticism, the human spirit is divine in its own right. It is not just created, made, fashioned by God, but it is a part and a parcel of the highest divine essence. Now this divine soul comes down, of course, into unworthy situations. It comes to live in an inferior, dirty world of ignorance, darkness, and stupidity, but it is still what it is. It's very, very important to remember. We are, as the Hindus often say, Tat Svam Asi, you are that. And that is the transcendent, is that which is beyond. We are not this, only in a derivative sense, but we are that. And if we keep remembering that, then certainly our ability to become a united being and thereby recover our original heritage is greatly enhanced. So what is the, let me just sort of conclude on this. What is the most evident duality in our life? It is our human nature, our ego personality with its sensate and feeling and thinking and intuitive functions, that which is the carrier of consciousness, but not really consciousness itself. And then there is another, small, secret, difficult to recognize, difficult to address and difficult to converse with. And yet this small seed of reality, which is all covered up by these personal factors and elements of the ego and of the outer world. This is the real self. Jung referred to it as the self with a capital S. The Gnostic said this is the divine seed, the spark that came from the eternal fire of the divine. And this is the real ultimate self of the human. Now, it is there. If it is addressed, first of all, it has to be recognized as being there. And that is where I think our contemporary culture is very much going the wrong way when it has become so secular that it has no inclination to even contemplate or recognize the presence of transcendence within us, which is the hope of our glory, and which is really the hope of our future. If there is nothing within us that comes from eternity, from the real truth, from the authentic reality, then we're lost. And not only that, but then we are nothing and nobody. But we are something and somebody, because within us dwells a secret seed of light. As St. Paul calls it, the hope of glory. Within us there is the potential of something very, very valuable and very, very marvelous and very beautiful and very joyous. But we have to get close to it. We have to, first of all, we have to recognize that there is such a thing, and that indeed there is something of that sort within us. It's not really all that difficult. We think back on our lives, maybe not very recently, because we all have gone through difficult times, maybe more difficult within the last year and a half than for a very long time and so forth. But there were times in our lives when we felt that we were really at home within us, that something was there, that something glorious was coming forth, that something was able to make us utterly happy. That's what was happening. Something was speaking to us that the voice of which ordinarily is covered up, is drowned out by all the noises of personal life and of the world and of the society wherein we live. But everyone is a potential Gnostic. In fact, more than that, everyone has some gnosis already. When you think back, when was it that I was really happy? When was it that I was really joyous? When was it that I really felt that I was liked and accepted and supported by something much, much greater than myself, or maybe even greater than any of the people whom I'm around? When I really felt close to a great and wondrous and joyous and kindly mystery. We all have been. Remember that? And if we remember that, then we can sort of slowly attach ourselves more and more to that immortal, that eternal self, the self with a capital S, the Gnostic self, the embodiment of infinity in the finite, which is within us. And then everything changes. It doesn't mean that it will change forever, but if we have that experience even a few times, then we really know with a real gnosis as to what reality is like, and that reality is within us, and that we are able to have contact with it, and that it guides us and it moves us toward its own ultimate fulfillment within us and with our help. And that is another word, a very prosaic word for the mystery of the Bridal Chamber. When the outer and the inner, the lesser and the greater, the human and the divine come together and are now united in a sacred and abiding union. In fact, I would venture to suggest, and there are indications of that in Gnostic sources, that in a mysterious sense, this is the Bridal Chamber, that coming together is something that is going on right now. It's going on all the time, but we don't look at it. We are not in contact with it. We are looking at the difficult and distracting and diverting and ultimately meaningless environment within which we live. We are fascinated by that which does not deserve fascination. And we have the admonishments from many different sources, every spiritual tradition, lift up your eyes unto the hills from whence cometh your help. We can do it. But first of all, we have to realize that it is possible. Secondly, that it is necessary. And thirdly, that it can be done, and therefore do it. So the possibility of the ineffable greatness of the coming together of the inner and the outer, the personal and the greater than personal, of the human and the divine, the promise of that event is here. And in its own secret way, it's happening already. There's no great fanfare, no great drumbeat, no fireworks, but it's just happening. If we pay attention to it, it will happen more. And then the purpose will have been fulfilled. Because the purpose is exactly that the strange, divided, broken world and reality into which we have come, and the strange, divided, broken human personality which we inhabit, is changed, is transformed, is brought into its own ultimate fulfillment. And all that was confusing and all that was disturbing and distracting has gone away, and the real has remained. It can be done. It has been done. It is being done. But we have to pay attention. We have to know that this indeed is our possibility, perhaps even our destiny, and to continue to strive in that direction. And there is no doubt about it. The promise of all the great teachers and the hierophants of history testify to it, that it can be done and that it will be done by us and with us and for us. It is. If there is any truth, any aletheia that I can convey, is that this potential is here, and that the potential wants to become actual. The potential wants to realize itself. And if we help it, if we support it, if we are there to offer the such psychic and other assistance that we can muster, then it assuredly will happen. And if you look into the various passages of the Gospel of Philip, you will find abundant evidence to that effect, because Philip is for the most part about this possibility that all the dualities, all the oppositions, all the seemingly contrary elements can be reconciled in an ultimate great union in the bridal chamber, and we will be again whole and complete and total, immanence and transcendence, outer and inner, masculine and feminine, secular and sacred, all be united in the great wonder which will be our wonder, and it is approaching us already at this time. I hope that this has been of some interest to you, and I thank you very much.